Thank you, sir, and thank you, Tarini. We have most probably looks like, with God's grace, this can be the penultimate webinar series in our COVID-19 and Cancer Virtual Expert Board. We have had, at least I was very enriched. Today we'll be discussing on three different aspects. First, I would request Dr. Parik sir to speak on, we keep hearing, pehle we used to hear Delta, then we are hearing now Delta Plus. I don't know where to hide and where to go. And sir would give his update on the same. After that, challenges of caregivers for COVID-19 patients is which will be moderated by Tarini. And finally, our star always, Dr. Ullas Patra, would moderate on FAQs. Sir, can I request you to start, sir?
Sure. Thank you very much. So, we are very privileged to have such a wonderful panelist group for today. Can we have that slide back, please? We have Dr. Dipali Vaidya, who's a radiation oncologist from UK. She's joining for the first time. Thank you very much for joining. We have Dr. Sanjay Desai, surgical oncologist from Indore. We have Dr. TVS VGK Tilak from the Indian Air Force, right now based in Pune, but has done pioneering work for field hospitals in COVID. We have Dr. Chetan Damne, who's a pediatric oncologist from Mumbai. And we have Dr. Simran Dilavari, who's a resident doctor and will, be really able to tell us what are the difficulties faced by residents when they have to be for 8 and 12-hour shifts in PP. Rajiv Vijay Kumar, Shruti Kate will join a little bit later, and Nandita will has said that she may or may not be able to join. So with this, we'll go on. I will start presenting my slides. We have been privileged to have Dr. Khilnani as one of our faculty earlier, and this is a photograph of him giving a interview on television about Delta Plus variants and impact on third wave. So this was just on June 23rd. So I thought that we should acknowledge his work and set the ball rolling with this. But before we move to Delta variant, and my slides are not moving forward, so I might have to. Yeah. Okay. So this is US data from CDC. It says that roughly 4,100 people have been hospitalized or died with COVID because of breakthrough infections after the vaccination. And in this, ultimately, after going through, the number of deaths have been 750 deaths after contracting COVID despite the vaccination. So let me start with Dr. Tilak. In your vast experience of setting up 2 field hospitals in Delhi area, what has been your experience with COVID, especially in patients who have been vaccinated?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to participate here. Rightly said, though we are seeing a lot of infections even in people who have been vaccinated, but one thing which you saw in the Delhi of the about 1,800 odd patients we saw in about 7 to 8 weeks, those who had received both the vaccines did definitely, something better than those who did not receive any vaccine.
Right.
And those who received at least even one vaccine were slightly better off than the others. The data completely could not be analyzed, but it was very obvious that those who did well were vaccinated.
Perfect. Right. Dr. Sanjay Desai, what has been your experience from Indore?
Sir, I was vaccinated and I contracted COVID after 6 weeks of vaccination.
All right.
My wife was also vaccinated double dose. She contracted it after 4 weeks of vaccination. And we both, I had a very mild disease, but my wife had a little bit severe disease. But we had to we were hospitalized for 5 days and we came back. And many of the around 25 consultants in Indore were admitted in hospitals for various causes due to COVID only after their full dose of vaccination. But they had mild disease. Only 1 or 2 had a very severe admissions, and they both were mildly obese. Therefore, they had what we call a cytochrome SAM was more with them.
Right. Got it. Amish, in Delhi, what has been your experience?
Sir, we have the data from 4 different hospitals, and consistently doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers, there is around 8% of fully vaccinated people have contracted COVID.
Right.
But out of 4 hospitals where the data is there, Max Hospital, Apollo, Medanta, and unpublished data from PSRI Hospital where I go, there was not a single death. There was one death in Apollo where the doctor who died, but she did not take the vaccination.
I see. Right. Let's find out what is the status in UK. Deepali, can I ask you, have you seen any severe infection, hospitalization, or death in people who are vaccinated for COVID?
So, Dr. Parekh, many thanks for giving me opportunity to be with you all today. So obviously in UK, the experience is same as you kind of most of the doctors have been talking today. The vaccinated patients have done really well. They really had, even if they had any illness, they had very mild form of illness. And definitely those who have had both the vaccines, the hospitalization rate has gone down quite a lot, and they have not captured any major illnesses. Obviously, I have experienced it myself. After first dose of vaccine, all my family had COVID, but we had mild illness. So 4 of us had COVID, but we had mild illness, and we recovered within a week or something.
Right.
Yeah. So the vaccine has definitely reduced hospitalization and severity of the disease.
Perfect. Chetan, can I ask you about this? We did a survey and there were 82 responders. And the question asked was, which COVID vaccine do you think is best for cancer patients? So do you agree with the survey that whichever is available at the earliest should be taken?
I totally agree, sir, because I think while waiting for the vaccine, you are more likely to get the virus or contact the virus if you are going out in the community. So if you see across the board, the efficacy of all the vaccines is very, very similar. 19-20 का फर्क है. So we strongly recommend that whatever vaccine is available, you should go for it. And
Dr. Tilak, I'll come back to you. 60% of our responders said that they would want to give a booster dose of COVID vaccine to cancer patients. Now, do you think this is just fear and conjecture, or this is based on data?
There is evolving data, sir. There is one publication which I recently read, May publication, which said that probably boosters are coming up in some of the places and maybe titrated with the antibody titers. We do antibody titers, see the levels, and then give a booster dose. But I feel that yes, this will become a norm because this pandemic is going to stay for some more time before it completely goes out.
Right. So now let's come to the variants and the classification. So what I could figure out from the CDC website is that there are 3 various sub-classifications of the variants: variants of interest, variants of concern, and variants of high consequence. And they said that so far there has not been a single variant of high consequence. But the variants of concern are 6, and Delta is only one of them: Alpha, Beta, Gamma, 2 Epsilon, and then Delta. And this was recently, a few days ago, on CNBC News from United States. And this is some report from the FDA commissioner that said that the Delta variant prevalence was between 0 and 5% in the United States. Now, if you look at the Delta variant, it's a mutation in the spike protein gene, and it leads to substitutions, which I mentioned here. And it says that there is increased transmissibility of the virus by 51 to 67% as opposed to the Alpha variant. So, Amish, do you think this was the responsible for the high spike of second wave in India?
Sir, in India, if I understand correctly, all the data which is coming for the variants are coming way after the wave has subsided.
Correct.
So right now we are looking at a retrospective data.
Very true.
I don't agree for the simple reason, sir. If you know people who have been vaccinated, who have got COVID in the first wave,
Yes.
extremely few people have got reinfection in the second wave.
Right.
So if a new Delta or new Delta plus variant was of concern, that's at least some of them would have been reinfected.
Right.
So to me, this is a retrospective data, requires further validation. Before that, it is very difficult for me to comment on that, sir.
Very, very
One point on that same note, sir.
please.
Though we are saying that the vaccine efficacy against the variants might be, we may not have efficacy against variants, etc. But if you actually see there are other things in addition to the antibodies, there are the T cell responses against various other epitopes which we do not know. So probably the efficacy will last across other mutations also. And like Dr. Amish Vora says, that probably that's the reason why the Delta plus variant may not have been, or a Delta variant may not have been responsible for most of the other cases.
Right.
Sir, sporadic
here that basically the Delta variant has shown increased transmissibility, and that is what was first detected in October 2020 in India, and it has spread across the world now. But the thing is that you have seen in the second wave in India, which is mostly the Delta wave, that the entire family gets infected. So that is how it says, that is what it says, that it is increased transmissibility. Again, it is not a variant of high consequence. So the infectivity, the virulence was almost the same. The in vitro studies that showed antibody neutralization were slightly lower. But again, as Dr. Tilak has already mentioned rightly, that there are other forms of immunity other than the humoral immunity that play a role. And the cell-mediated immunity definitely will have memory and it will last for a longer duration of time. So that might be helpful to us.
Right. So all three of you agree with what is shown in the slide. Sanjay, you were saying something.
Sir, there were some few sporadic cases. The first wave had an infected patient. That patient also got vaccinated somehow by some means. He was also infected again with the second wave.
Yes.
So they are known, means the whole family was infected by the second wave.
And was the severity in the second wave significant to require hospitalization?
The fever was persistent. We did not go. He required hospitalization. And after remdesivir and the steroids, the fever went.
I see. Right. So this is since they were talk about antibody. So variants that make antibody treatment less effective is shown here. Now this is about antibody treatment. And the one thing that is intriguing, at least interesting to me, is Delta is only one of the 12 variants that is shown here. So if you look at epsilon, kappa, eta, zeta, gamma, beta, and so on and so forth, Delta variant is only one of those where the antibody treatment is less effective. But we still talk of Delta variants only, which is very surprising to me. Now, there is actually data on the genomic variation that has been published from India. This is an article from Gujarat that was published in March 2021. And this is how it compared the various mutations shown in Gujarat and India as compared to the rest of the world. And if you just quickly look at the pie chart of the red, you can see that what was seen in Gujarat and what was seen in North America is quite identical. Whereas what was seen in India and the rest of the Asia is similar to what was seen in Oceania as far as the red pie is concerned. So there are ways of identifying the mutation and seeing how it affects whether the patient died or recovered. And this was seen in almost 2,000 patients that were studied from Gujarat. And very interestingly, though two variants were actually increasing the risk of death, there is one variant which actually reduces the risk of death. If you see the green arrow in the bottom, 4.28 is frequency associated with recovery, whereas it is 0.00 frequency associated with the disease. So clearly, there is some correlation between the type of the mutation and variant as opposed to this. So Chetan, I'll come back to you again. Delta variant we have discussed. What about Delta plus variant? Is it that we have this fear without data? Or we feel that there is some real data that substantiates the fact that this might be more dangerous?
No, so I think there is just that AY1 mutation that is in addition to the Delta phenotype that we have for the Delta plus variant. And currently in India, NIV has just isolated these variants and they are looking at neutralization titers. They have isolated these variants currently from 6 states only at the moment. I think that is where most of the sequencing is being done. So that is where we stand as of now. But clinically, if you see if the Delta plus variant is spreading around, we have not seen that it causes increased risk of hospitalizations or deaths. But again, that is in evolution. So that information is in evolution. And so it is very difficult to comment on or generalize anything at this time. But I feel that it is a minor variant that was already present on other, that substitution or mutation is already present on other variants, and it has not caused increased virulence. So this should not be so much of a problem, or the fear should not be as much, but definitely precautions should be taken.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now let's compare to what is happening to UK with India, and I'll ask Dr. Vaidya to come in here. If you look at the percentage of the population that is fully vaccinated, it's almost half, 48.4% in United Kingdom as opposed to 4% in India. But in spite of this, if you look at the daily new cases, and this is 2 days old data, 27 June, with a population of 1.3 billion, India had 46,643 new cases, as opposed to UK with a population of 68 million having 14,876 new cases. And in fact, if you look at COVID admissions in the UK over the last few days, it has increased by 10%. It has increased to 145. So Deepali, can you tell me whether this has been your experience or is it different from what I've shown?
So Dr. Parekh, this data definitely reflects what we actually have seen around us in hospitals. So the number of cases of patients with COVID infections have gone up, but definitely because of vaccination, the hospitalization has not been as bad as it was last year this time. So, and the patients are coming in the hospital with kind of chest infection signs or minor illnesses, but not needing any intensive care input. So yes, this data does reflect that in spite of vaccination, this has gone up. But what has been seen that during this time, they're mostly younger patients. Last time during the pandemic at the peak, they were mostly elderly patients like 70 plus or 50 plus. But now the younger population who are still waiting to be vaccinated. Like this weekend, there were open centers where people could just walk in and get vaccination.
Very nice.
So that has been the experience, that the younger people who did not have vaccination so far have been the ones who needed hospitalization. But again, the intensive care admissions have not gone up. So these are only still illnesses where they're probably needing oxygen input and some other support, but not severely ill.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Tilak, I will ask you to gaze through the crystal ball and tell us, because you as a partner in public health and emergency medical response, you have to be prepared for the potential third wave. So when do you think it will start and when do you think it will peak in India?
So as we see, sir, if a particular variant has to establish itself in a particular community, there are by and large two processes. One is something which is dependent on a particular individual, which we call as super spreaders. And second is where the activity between individuals is more. So if the virus has got high transmissibility, and if we are not able to enforce COVID appropriate behavior in the form of some amount of lockdown, some amount of distancing, etc., it appears as if it is at the corner, maybe around end of July, mid of August, and will probably go until September, October. So that is my estimate.
Right. So hopefully by October, we will be free of the major burden of the pandemic.
Fingers crossed.
And as Chetan has mentioned, and many of you have endorsed, the general perception is that vaccination is going to protect our cancer patients as well. though it might be necessary to give a booster dose at the end of 1 year. Now, for the last part, I've already completed my time. I'll take 1 more minute. This was something that was published in the newspapers today, and it said that in a survey testing done in Mumbai, 50% of Mumbai kids are already having the antibodies, and this included people from the poor sector as well as from the affluent sector, as well as children between the age of 1 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, and 15 to 18, and it was more or less the same. So it looks as if half the kids or half the younger population is already protected. So this was again the survey, and you can see that it's almost equally divided between yes, no, and not sure. Chetan, since you are the pediatric guy here, I'll like to ask your opinion. What do you think will happen to kids? Will they be affected more than adults when the third wave hits our city?
Sir, I think that the kids will not be as much affected as much, because if you see the physiology of the disease or pathophysiology, the ACE receptors are the ones, the spike protein binds to these ACE receptors, and that is how the virus is internalized. So children by biology have reduced number of ACE receptors in the nasopharynx. So that might protect them a little bit, and that has been the experience so far. So children might not be as much affected, and even if you see the adult population data, most of the patients that were affected or severely affected were the ones, those who had comorbidities. So taking all these host factors and the pathophysiology into picture, I think the children will not be affected as much. They will have URTI symptoms, they will have common cold, but they will not be hospitalized.
That is very reassuring. Thank you very much. And before I end, I'll just like to thank all the participants who have taken part in our webinars. And you can see that clearly a significant number of them have benefited from this discussions that we've had in preparation for the third wave. So with this, I'll stop and hand it over back to Dr. Amish to continue with the next part of today's session.
Thank you, sir. Amazing. It's amazing. Where do you get all these data from? We need to learn from you to prepare such wonderful slides. Coming to the next topic, Dr. Tarini Sahu is going to discuss about plight of caregiver. And I think that is very, very extremely important point. And I always used to wonder, okay, somebody COVID positive, going for CT scan, going for admission, going for even simple blood collection. And what these caregivers must be undergoing, it's amazing. Tarini, over to you to discuss this further.
Just one more thing. Was it the caregivers or the healthcare givers? So because
you can take both of them.
Yeah, because the caregivers, I don't think anyone would have a perspective of it. So I felt it was healthcare. So I prepared it as such. So sir,
no problem. No problem.
Thank you.
This is also extremely important. This is also extremely important, Tarini.
Amish, can I comment on this?
No.
No, I'm going to come on this. Dr. Sahu, this is exactly how we feel when you ask us question during moderation. If you are about triple negative, you ask about HER2 nucleus. This is payback time for you.
Caregivers. I'll ask it. Okay. So I presume, so let's do it both ways. And then first of all, is Dr. Shruti here and Dr. Nandita, sir, she won't be joining. That's what I presume.
Dr. Shruti will join later. She is busy in some other webinar. Yeah, so Nandita may or may not join because she is in a place where there is very limited internet connection.
So before we start off,
and Rajiv has joined, so you can include him.
Okay, Dr. Rajiv has joined. So how many of the panelists? Let's start with Dr. Chetan or Tilak, or maybe anyone who had a family member who was COVID positive and who was admitted to the hospital. Tilak, will I start with you, Dr. Tilak?
So my sister, brother-in-law, both the kids aged 16 and 13, all four were affected. My sister.
So you have experienced it as a caregiver also.
As a caregiver, and my sister also happens to be a chronic hepatitis B asymptomatic carrier. So there was some issues, but even by day 7, she continued to have high-grade fever and had to use favipiravir, and she responded. She did not request steroids.
So you had it. Dr. Chetan, any experience of being a caregiver?
Yes. My parents were admitted, both of them, with COVID-19, but they sailed through after 5 days of admission.
Okay. Any other panelists? Dr. Rajiv, Dr. Sanjay
So
sir?
I would like to add
Yes.
Dr. Deepali?
Yes, I would definitely like to mention that my husband, who is also intensivist, who works in Bedford Hospital in UK, so he has been quite busy as you all have been.
Okay.
So he captured COVID and he was ill. So we tried to self-isolate him in the house.
Okay.
It didn't really work, and we all eventually had COVID. So yes, we did give him some care at home, and obviously, monitoring oxygen saturations and having seen the worst case scenario in intensive care unit, I think it has been challenging to manage things at home. But because we had our first dose of vaccine just 10 days prior to that, I think we managed and come out of it just with minor illness.
Dr. Simran?
What about you? Good evening. I just finished my internship, and my grandmother, who was a patient undergoing palliation, so she developed COVID. We eventually, really unfortunately, lost her to COVID. So I've seen my first duty days were into COVID, and then seeing it as a caregiver was a extremely challenging and I learned a very different approach to looking at patients after seeing my grandmother suffer through it.
Okay. Dr. Sanjay and then Dr. Rajiv, and then we take the panel.
Yes, sir. I was infected. My wife was infected. My mother was also infected. Okay. Mother, it was for mother. It was difficult for her to be. We had to hospitalize for 20 days to her, and after hospitalization, bringing back her home and bringing her back to normal was a difficult task. Still today, she is also complaining of aches, pains, weaknesses, loss of the controls. This is going on with her. Both of us, as in professionals, we recovered well, but we had a rest of. I had a rest of.
So, Dr. Rajiv, you, and then I move on.
Thank you. What happened is my father fell ill, and this during the probably May.
Positive.
He was COVID positive, and then afterwards I had to take off. That time we didn't have any hospital beds, and
basic thing what I wanted to bring out is all of us somehow have been affected by COVID, either personally or I had a family member who was affected by COVID.
Yes.
So this is what is coming out. I had my wife who was COVID positive, but luckily none in the family were COVID positive. She's Ullas marked this. She's much younger than I am, so she did very, very well. Okay. So now we come down and skip to the things, and let me put the healthcare professional perspective which I put up, and let's see where the caregiver's perspective will come in. I'm sorry, there's something which I had to do now. So I will come to Dr. Chetan first, and then probably we'll go to Dr. Shimran. Let me get the idea of working in a super specialty hospital, and then probably how a resident feels about it. The first and second wave, Dr. Chetan, do you think there is a perception change that has come to the healthcare professionals? Are we less afraid, more cautious? Are we able to fight this virus more in a much better way?
So definitely whatever you said is right. In the beginning, everybody was afraid. Everybody was running away from the hospital. But later on, when people realized that wearing proper protection is very helpful, wearing a mask and gowning is important, people were ready to go and work in the wards. So I'll tell you, our experience is that all the people who were on COVID duty, none of them actually developed COVID while they were on duty. Most of them developed after they went home, and or they were off duty, like released after 1 or 2 months of COVID duty, and after that they got COVID. So they contacted in the community.
This also was seen probably in the ICU setting. People who are in the ICU were so very careful dealing with COVID patients. They had lesser positivity, and much of the doctors who were not doing COVID duties turned out to be more positive because we were little less cautious and probably were not wearing the mask enough, not protecting ourselves enough. Dr. Shimran, what do you feel? You have worked in both the first and second wave. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So I began my internship in the first
wave. The second wave. What has changed in the second wave than in the first wave?
the first wave, what I had
and
observed.
request all the panelists to be very short, crisp answers, very clear.
Yes, sir. So in the first wave, what I had observed was the fear was more. There was more caution towards the month of January and February. Things started to turn towards the normal. So there was a little level of relaxation in even the mindset of people. So that's where I feel we our caution tipped a little bit in the second wave.
Okay, so that's how it is. So, Dr. Dipali, in UK, did you isolate yourself or did you fear from going to the work anyway? Probably all of us would have done that, but we ultimately turned up for work. So, Dr. Dipali, in UK, did you have to go through this?
I think we all have faced similar problems, whether it's UK or India. I think all the healthcare professionals have had some fear in mind going to work during COVID. So I'm not going to say I didn't have any fear. I did have some fear. And we have had discussions in our departments, and we were allowed to do some work from home, which actually has helped. So if you're working for 5 days, you're allowed to work from home for a day or something like that, so that you're not traveling as much and you're not with other staff members as much as possible. So that
being a
has
radiation oncologist, it did help to be a radiation oncologist during this time.
Well, I'm a clinical oncologist, so I do practice chemotherapy.
You do the chemotherapy part also.
I do chemotherapy part of it as well. So, but besides that, it does help on a non-clinical day if you really want to do admin work or you're doing radiotherapy planning, which can be done remotely. So those kind of things were allowed to do, and that has helped, and that probably would carry on, and that can be the future as well. So not necessarily every time you need to be physically present in the hospital. So that was one of the options. And as you can imagine, even with the clinics, we've been doing virtual clinics. So not the patients didn't have to come.
I totally get it. We are moving towards a semi-physical type of thing. So a lot of consultations have all become online now.
Yeah,
so did anyone in the panel isolate themselves into a hostel or something in the first wave? The second wave, I know nothing like this happened. In the first wave, the uncertainty was so much that some of the doctors did isolate themselves.
Yes, sir.
Anyone in the panel did that? Dr. Simran, you did that?
Yes, I was living in a separate flat for the first wave.
Apart from Dr. Simran, anyone, Dr. Sanjay?
No.
You are a super consultant. I know you would not even think of that.
So our residents were put up in separate rooms in the mess for their duties. So they were told to isolate, yes, in the first wave.
In the first wave. Second wave, this is totally gone. The
second wave
part is totally gone.
It was not so.
So this is the first wave data which has come from India. And this is what is coming out, that I continue to stay at home as usual, around 70%. Around 10% isolated themselves and 22% were self-isolating at home, being in a separate room, not there with the kids. So I will just skip this part because it is a mix of it, but I'll ask Dr. Sanjay.
Yes, sir.
What do you think was more difficult? Being a doctor, fearful of COVID, did not know what COVID was, not getting the surgeries done, patients were progressing with on something, or having your mother being on the COVID bed?
Sir, difficult part was basically controlling the patient inflow. In the first wave, we had a waiting list which we cleared it, but for the month of April, we did not operate a single patient in the first wave. From May onwards, we started operating. First wave on the May, we did alternative day surgeries. From then, June onwards, it was regularly 2 surgeries daily till today. In the second wave, we did not stop anything.
Part of the job, a healthcare professional or a caregiver, which was more difficult?
Healthcare professional, sir.
Okay.
Caregiver, so, because explanation to the patient was also much more important. Why we are delaying, what were the symptoms, because even in the post-op period, some patients developed COVID in the being in the hospital.
Little short answers, because I have one more Dr. Ullas to go after this, the start of the evening. We have to give that time to him also. So all of you, please request for short answers. Tilak, you went through being a caregiver and you also headed a COVID hospital for the military. So Ami, so can you tell me which was more difficult?
I think as a healthcare professional, it was more tough than being a caregiver.
Okay, definitely. So anyone in the panel, because all of you have had a family member affected with COVID. Anyone in the panel felt that being a caregiver was more difficult because the emotional quotient was much higher then?
Yeah, I felt so. In sense that
so too.
Okay, so Dr. Simran felt and Dr. Rajiv. So basically, what's coming? Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I felt that emotional quotient was definitely high, and
so basically, that is where it is, that it is always sometimes difficult to be a caregiver, and that is something that's always there, because the emotional quotient is very. But most of us also feel that being a professional during this time was also very difficult. I'll just come to something which was very nicely done. I got this data last evening, and if you look at it, this has come from India. This has come from a Mumbai article, and this was something that, being oncologists, we are lucky that our income did not dip that much. Probably in metros, people had a dip, which Dr. Purvesh showed. In non-metros, the dip in oncological practice was not there that much. I did not see in Bhopal also in the first wave. So, but here you see that most of the medical professionals did lose a lot of medical income, and that's what is being in this survey was for the medical professionals. So, Dr. Sanjay, you are in an Indore tier 2 city, maybe going to a tier 1. Did you feel the pinch because the surgeries were down?
In the first wave, it was down. Second wave, no.
Okay.
Patient anyhow tried to reach. Second wave, anyhow, patient tried to reach the hospital.
Okay. So because I'm not asking Dr. Tilak and Dr. Chetan, because they are definitely, I understand the way how they is on a fixed income scale. Dr. Rajiv, in Bangalore, it was same, that you had a dip in the patient load coming down to? You're muted.
I said, yes, there was a dip in the patient load, but because I'm a fixed variable income, so actually it didn't actually matter much. My daycare center, the number of patients who were coming continued.
Okay. Dr. Tilak, I want you to, because you spoke on this little bit, but this data is very, very interesting, because I see that 86 to 89%, we spoke so much on the mental part of it. And this is a survey which has come out, and I feel that none of 80 to 90% of doctors did not have any depression, any anxiety, any stress. How do you read this data? Because the day we spoke, maybe 1 or 2 weeks earlier, we found that little bit different from what this is being reflected. This is on a questionnaire.
So, as we are showing that what is probably is that the healthcare professionals have generally been tried to stay as a group. So wherever they were able to share information, wherever they were able to share their agony and discomfort, all of them were going through the same kind of waves. So when the duties were very tough, all were in the tough waves. When the duties were kind of eased out, they're all eased out. So probably that's the reason why they are a good support system. And that's the reason why only about 14% of them may have mild, moderate or severe, but 86% of them still did not have depression.
Dr. Dipali, how is there in UK? Did you feel that the anxiety level, the stress level was much higher than what this survey showed? It may not reflect the whole of India. It is just a very selected population. So what is your take on this?
So I think it has been a difficult times for everyone, and whatever I have seen around me and in UK, the mental health issues have really raised quite a lot. So anxiety has gone up in healthcare professionals, definitely. I'm not sure about about the depression, but yes, stress and anxiety levels have definitely gone up. And the National Health Service is definitely providing support for all the staff members. So we have webinar series, we have support system available in all the hospitals for staff members to be able to access it as and when possible. So the data is quite different to what's been kind of shown.
I think that's because as a country, we have we very rarely seek the help of psychologists or psychiatrists. Dr. Chetan, do you feel that as a country we have not utilized our psychologists, psychiatrists to the best of our what we should be doing? Chetan is there? Okay, this is very interesting. Let me come down to Tilak, who has worked with COVID hospitals. What do you find? This is a data from Sri Lanka, and the data was published this year, 2 months back. The psychological distress is age a factor? Means, do the elderly professionals undergo more of a psychological distress during the COVID than the young? What is your take on this?
I think with the transmission of the illness being more in the elderly and having those with comorbidities having more problems, I think there was a higher level of anxiety among the elderly professionals for sure.
Okay, Simran, what do you feel? What would be the data would be? I'll come to the next slide with what the data was from Sri Lanka. What do you feel? The younger had more of a stress, or the elderly professionals, your senior colleagues had more stress?
Sir, I would feel the younger crowd had more stress because this is probably the first time we faced a pandemic like this. As an intern, I was put into the world of a pandemic, so it was very difficult for me to gauge and deal with that.
Okay, so you know what she's speaking is actually what is there in this data, and just look at it and look at the age factor. Less than 35, more than 35, there is statistical significant stress for doctors who are less than 35. Dr. Rajiv, what is your take on this? And then I'll go to Dr. Dipali. Did UK face the same thing? Because this is something very interesting. I thought the Tilak way, that the elderly would be more stressed, but this is something that was totally taken me out and read the whole article. Something very interesting. And Dr. Simran is actually reflecting the same values. What do you think, Dr. Rajiv?
Actually, I had a completely different viewpoint on this. What happened is that in our hospital, we had around 8 to 10 doctors who were on COVID duty all throughout. And because the rest of the departments, subspecialty departments, we were only seeing once in a week, we were doing COVID duty. The rest of the times, our stresses were mainly that, okay, number of patients have come down, revenues come down to a certain extent. Apart from that, all of us were enjoying life. We're like, oh, we're going home early, having time with our kids and family. This is fantastic. Thanks to COVID, thanks to China. This is the mood. So actually, our stress levels came down. So it's
and after I'm 3 months, the pressure of income also started coming in. The enjoyment started coming.
True.
Okay, Dipali, do you feel this data? Because the data is something very different from what I expected. Do you think this UK, if the data comes out someday, this will be same, that the younger doctors felt more of a psychological distress?
I think probably younger and the middle age rather than the senior doctors. That's what I have seen around me, and probably that's what
so you also vouch for this data. That's what you also.
Yes, I would. Means what I have seen, and one of the factors, the previous psychiatric problems, whether that has contributed, I think that would play a major role along with the age. So age probably wouldn't be independent factor in deciding whether the surroundings.
To the beauty of this article, the presence of physical comorbidity, the stress was actually lesser, which we all expect would have been more. And work experience more than 10 years, less than 10 years, you see that the work experience who are younger were actually more stressful. Because probably, as Dr. Simran told, they're facing this for the first time. That could be one of the factors. And that's something which I felt was very, very, very important. Dr. Chetan, you are there?
Yes, I'm there. Yes.
This is something which I want to ask you. With the mask on, patients not able to see your face, you not able to see the patient face. I had a patient today, 11 years after, came down to me, an ALL patient. I had treated, I had forgotten his face. I told, please take your mask off. I want to see you first. Because 11 years ALL cured is something we do not see every day. So my point is, has this caused a doctor-patient communication gap? What is your take on that?
Yes, certainly it has caused a lot of gap. The personal face-to-face interaction has gone down. And also you tend to speak less. You want to conserve your words and try to finish things in a short duration of time. So that communication is not as much as you would have.
Has that trust factor been affected because of the communication gap?
I don't think so.
Because you're in Tata, it has not happened? Could that be a matter also?
Might be possible. We'll ask others.
Okay, let's come down to Dr. Sanjay, because this is important. This article is published from Chennai. So what do you feel? Doctor-patient communication, has it been affected by the mask and everything is hidden? You only see the eyes probably many times.
Yes, sir. The patient always complained, we want to see your faces. And you could not communicate with them properly.
And the trust factor, has it come down or it's the same?
No, trust factor, I have lost many patients not coming up for the follow-up after the first or second.
That's what you told. You're telling us. Okay. So Dr. Dipali, I want to have a viewpoint, then Dr. Rajiv, and then probably end my panel. Dr. Dipali.
Yes, so I definitely agree with all the other panel members that having used mask does affect your communication with your patients. I'm not entirely convinced that it will affect the trust factor, but communication is not as effective, especially in elderly patients where they rely on your facial expressions. So definitely it has affected, but trust is obviously.
You feel that won't be affected. Yeah. Dr. Rajiv, your take. A small quick word on
basically I generally read people's faces, which is I've been unable to do that because they're all wearing masks. So I tell them jeep dikhav. So they remove their mask and show me their tongue, so I at least know whom I'm talking to.
Okay, so basically this cross-sectional study from Chennai looked at things, and they definitely found that the doctor-patient communication score was affected, but rightly pointed most of the panel that trust was still intact. The trust factor did not get affected as per this communication cross-sectional study which happened from India. So the factors which Dr. Simran spoke could have been affected. The training in infectious diseases. Are we all trained in infectious diseases? Is our MBBS course sufficient enough for infectious disease training? Dr. Chetan, what do you feel? Yes, no, and then Dr. Tilak.
So I think there are a lot of lacunae in our education system, but yes, certainly we need to ramp up our training.
Okay, Dr. Tilak, because you have been heading some hospitals, so what do you feel the juniors lack the skill of in infectious disease management?
I think the approach towards infectious diseases can be further streamlined better. And at the AFMC, we have a faculty of infectious disease specialists whose experience we are taking for training of our students and our PGs.
So basically, that is the factor which all of us need to work upon. Dr. Simran, did you find a PPE kit a problem, and are you comfortable with it now? And it's much easier now.
So initially, it was very, very problematic. Like it seemed like an alien suit the first time I entered into my internship.
So did someone teach you, or you had to learn it by yourself?
No, we had an orientation program where they did teach us about the correct methods of wearing the PPE. Now I'm much comfortable. N95 has become a part of me
part
now.
Of your life. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is what it is. Again, the problems regarding PPE was very much put up, and this was already discussed in one of the previous COVID sessions. This is something beautiful. I'll end this with 2-3 slides. Lack of amenities. Is this a concern, Dr. Tilak? You have been heading you have been looking into the administrative part also. What do you feel on this part? The lack of amenities is a big problem. 92% of doctors polled feel that the hospitals were not equipped enough to handle this amount of patients, or not equipped enough to handle sick patients.
I think our numbers would be much less, sir. Much less than
because you work in a very different setup. But do you feel in general public?
Even at the makeshift hospital which we had for the civilians in Delhi, a 1,000-bedded setup also, I think the amenities were good enough, sir.
And Dr. Chetan, did Tata have enough trained paramedical staffs to take care of the COVID? Did you face any challenge at any point?
We did have challenges in the beginning, but yes, we did feel that even now we need more staff.
Okay. So at personal levels, I'll end up with Dr. Dipali. Do the society, there was an initial hesitation in UK because in India there were reports of junior doctors not getting rooms for rents. Did it happen in UK, or is it much more better there?
Sorry, I probably didn't get your question. I'm so sorry.
Was the fear of isolated by society there for the medical staff in UK because you were exposed to COVID, you were working with COVID patients? So did other people in the society who were non-medicals little bit distance themselves from you?
I think there was some fear. I wouldn't say there wasn't, but not that many people have experienced or complained about it. So people would isolate from medical staff, in the society. They wouldn't mix with them. But obviously during the pandemic, people couldn't meet anyway. So it wasn't very obvious, I would say.
So did anyone in the panel felt a pressure from the family not to work during COVID? Aapne bahut kama liya, baitho kuch mahine. Like Rajiv told, enjoy your life. Did anyone's wife tell them not to go to the work, or maybe husband? Anyone can speak out. Tilak?
So it was like, this is my third deployment after initial last year Delhi, then Patna, then this year again Delhi. So there was a jab, not exactly a more of like a taunt sort of thing. Tum hi ho gaya department, aur koi nahi hai. But never a dissuading factor.
Yeah. So I think that has happened to all of us. So I think what I'm getting, I'm closing it here and letting Ulas do the FAQs. The only thing I'm getting it here is a caregiver. Being a caregiver was probably not that difficult. Most of the panel, maybe it was 50-50 maybe. Most of the panel felt that being a doctor was more difficult, probably because we knew COVID little more better way. We could give a better care. We were better caregivers and we were not that anxious. That happened to me also. I simply self-isolated my wife. Did not give her anything as a thing. I just wanted her to take some multivitamins. That also I don't know why I told her. But that's it. So I didn't tell her to do anything else. I did not take the Favipiravir and other things as it was normally told. So I think that was there. So we knew it, and it happened in the second wave. Maybe the first wave was very, very different because we didn't know the first wave. That was number one. Number two, what I felt has come out of it is that There were a lot of issues in the first wave, but knowing it has helped us manage the second wave much better. The second wave was worse, as Dr. Ullas pointed out last time, is it happened so fast that we got a huge number of patients in very short time. And I think that Tilak was also there in the panel, and that's what the second was all about. Vaccination, all of us feel that all should be getting vaccinated. I agree to Dr. Chetan, the third wave may not be the children's wave because the ACE receptors are just not there for them to get the virus to just internalize. So with that, I stop here, stop my share and go to Dr. Ullas. And sorry, sir, if I just missed the caregiver and the professional care thing.
No, so before you finish, if I may, before you finish,
I know that.
Compliments to Dr. Parekh and to Dr. Simran. It's heartening to have a first-hand experience from an absolute intern who's spoken from her heart. Compliments to all of you.
Thank you. It was my privilege to be a part of such a thing. I'm honored.
Wait, hang on. The privilege continues, and you have Ullas Batra now.
So I'll just like to make one comment, Sahu.
Yes, sir.
That doctors, whether they are senior, mid-level or juniors, we should not hesitate to take and offer professional help whenever some problem occurs, whether it's a financial problem, a physical problem or a mental problem. The main problem starts because we hesitate to take professional help, and that should be that should be encouraged.
Sir, rightly told, sir. What I have felt also, the professional help for a mental disease is still, there is a taboo in India, and it is much more severe than taking help for cancer also. So that taboo has to go away. I tell my patients, sir, pagal to nahi hu, aap kahan bhej rahe ho mere ko? That's the first answer I get it. So I feel that we need to somehow encourage our patients and ourselves also.
So Dr. Sahu, just one small comment on that. My wife is a neurologist, and she says that she sees so many headaches, and when she digs into the detail, there are so many people suffering with depression, but none of them want to seek psychiatric help. So it is prevalent, just not known.
Okay, I think I have invited myself already.
Yes, Ullas, please start. Yeah, so thank you. I was muted when I was speaking. Sorry.
No, not an issue, sir. I'll start now, and it's basically a revision course, and I probably have not more than 10-12 minutes. And I actually told Dr. Parekh to let Dr. Sahu continue, but I think, okay, let me start from here. Okay, so here is my FAQs about COVID and cancer, and I would request everyone to be short and sweet because food is waiting and because the wife is sitting on the next one and the next room. And I had to mention her, Dr. Amish, because else you will not like it and she will not like it that today I didn't mention it about her. Okay. So my first reactions when I was just preparing about the FAQs about COVID and cancer, and this one goes to you, Simran. Ye kab khatam hoga? Is this the first question that everybody keeps on? You know, every time I go down to my to have dinner with my family, that's what they ask us. Ye kab khatam hoga? Will it ever end?
Absolutely, absolutely. Family, rickshaw walas, everybody, they see you wearing scrubs in there. The first question is, when will this end? When is this?
Tell me, Simran, when will it end? The youngster, the ever so optimist, tell me when will it end?
Sir, I wish I had an answer to this. I hope by the third wave we should be able to be in a comfortable position.
Dr. Chetan.
So I think we will be done with the third wave, but
we will be done with the third wave, or the third wave will be done with us.
I just hope there are no new variants.
Yes.
Okay. So 2022, are we going to be safe?
I think we'll be okay.
Okay, you will be okay. Dr. Rajiv.
We'll probably 2023, we'll have third wave, then fourth wave, smaller waves, then it will become like a endemic disease, and then afterwards we'll get used to it and we'll throw away our masks.
Pandemic to endemic to something else. Dr. Sanjay?
Sir, I have read 2-3 articles. It is showing 2025.
I think with every passing, age group difference, it is increasing now, sir. I can actually see from here, Amish, but going by that concept, Amish will say it is almost finished now. Amish is the youngest.
He's the youngest.
Okay, Tilak. Dr. Tilak, Wifey is there. She's jabbing you. Why do you have to attend all the panels now, right?
So I'm more of an optimistic kind of thing. Maybe we need to learn to live with it.
You learn to live with it. Dr. Parekh, the youngest of them, the toddler, the adolescent age group. So when we're in.
So all the predictions have always been off the mark.
Fantastic.
Having said that, I definitely feel that we have passed the major problems that this pandemic is going to cause. Third wave may or may not come. If it comes, it is going to be less severe than what we experienced in the second wave. And then I think the spirit of the population of India that chalta hai and kuch bhi hone do, humko kamai ke liye rozi roti ke liye jana hai, will sort out everything.
True that. We go for roti, somebody else goes for rosy. We will talk about that later, sir. Okay. So I seem to be in a very good mood today. I think my wife is going to make note of it now that why is this guy in a good mood today? Okay.
Because of Rosie.
No, roti. Okay. So I thought I'll divide these questions into three. One was about diagnosis and prevention. The other one was about treatment, and the other one was about follow-up. So let's start with Dr. Amish. Is ordering COVID testing necessary before? So I'm going to concentrate mainly on cancer and COVID. Is ordering COVID testing before any cancer-directed therapy necessary, essentially legally bound? Do you now also start your first cycle of chemo and you order an RT-PCR or whatever test prior to that? I'll take you for the first two, necessary, essential. Dr. Parikh, I like your comments about legally bounding.
It is right now in the third wave, the second wave passing in Delhi today. It is not necessary for the staff, but it is essential for the patient.
So you are still ordering some kind of COVID test prior to starting first cycle of chemo, not before every cycle.
100% before first. And every 14 days after that, I'm still ordering.
So you're still doing it. Okay, good. Because today only one patient I met, he's one very senior, world famous, very educated oncologist has told me this, that every 2 weeks COVID test in which you didn't ask him, baat karao. Maybe I have spoken to him today. Okay, Rajiv, your take.
Actually, there are certain patients who ask for it, saying that only if you're doing these tests on a regular basis do we feel safe. But then afterwards, we're doing it for the first test. But then after that, then only as and when it is clinically warranted. Else, we're not doing it.
Okay, Dr. Tilak.
So, I think before starting any therapy, we must get it done, but thereafter it should be symptom oriented. Though our daycare center does get a test done every 3 weeks for every 3 week protocol before the next cycle, which is slightly awkward. But I'm yet to discuss it with my sister why they are doing it. Yeah, I'm not party to it. I'm not in favor.
You want to party to it now. Now anything which happens in army, you want to party to it. That is it. We don't know anyone else.
But why is it awkward? I still order it once in 3 weeks.
Awkward, Dr. Sahu, because at my center, at least with even first wave, second wave, third wave in between, we have just got symptom ordered at the first one chemotherapy. After that, symptom based, Dr. Sahu, how many tests will you do? I mean, how many RT-PCRs and how many RATs would you do? And we have shown enough and more literature, Dr. Sahu, that, giving chemotherapy and patient risk of COVID doesn't really make a difference.
I totally agree. But on that point, if someone on a practice does it during this pandemic, and if the report comes in 1 hour or 2 hours as per the thing it is, and they don't have to wait for the report, what is the harm in doing it? And if there is specially a case where you would be doing a COVID positive, would you be giving chemotherapy if patient comes to you with a COVID positive report? So you would be thinking twice. What protocol will I give? Will I give it? Can it delay for 7 days? So I don't think there's any.
So we are split 2-2 on this. Dr. Parikh, sir, the medico-legal aspect of it.
The first thing that I would like to know is whether my staff is fully vaccinated or not. Okay. If the staff is fully vaccinated, then I would be next question I'll ask is is the patient party vaccinated?
Okay.
If both parties are vaccinated, then I would not do the test unless the patient is symptomatic for COVID.
तब तक वो patient को डॉक्टर अमीश के पास चला जाएगा ना. प्रॉब्लम में इतने सवाल पूछेंगे तो प्रॉब्लम हो जाएगा.
This should also be an opportunity for us to take care of vaccine hesitancy. We should convey the message that if you are vaccinated, you are safe, then I am also reassured. So I think from that point of view, I would do that.
So Simran, where are you posted now, Dr. Simran?
I finished with my internship. I'm working as a medical officer at a vaccination center only.
Okay, vaccination center.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So we will talk
As a
about
part
that.
of
But
my
I mean,
COVID
this
duties.
is actually news. I mean, I actually thought that everybody would be as nobody would really call it tested, but that's nice. It's nice to know that people are still doing. So, Amish, which testing? RT-PCR, rapid antigen?
What does UK do? Just sorry, last.
Okay, yeah, Dr. Dipali. Yeah, sure. Dr. Dipali, yeah.
So obviously it's mostly protocol based, as you can imagine. So in our center, if you're thinking about just radiotherapy patients, they all get a PCR test done on the day one. That means before radiotherapy planning scan. Then once they start the treatment, they will have a PCR test once a week, and they will do rapid antigen test at home twice a week. So this is how we are monitoring these patients. So I agree with most of the panelists. It's about patients who are symptomatic, but I completely agree with Dr. Parikh as well. It's about thinking about other patients who may be severely neutropenic sitting in the same area, or it could be about the staff members. So safety about other patients, about the staff member, not about just the patient who we are treating. So I think it's taking everything into account. I think this is the protocol which has been set up in our department, nice. And that's what we
Amish, thank you, Dr. Dipali. Amish, I just saw Sahu doing 2 thumbs up to me, and I could read in between the lines what he exactly wanted to tell me. So, Dr. Amish, today in Delhi, I think there were 57 cases yesterday. When do you plan to stop this 2 weekly, 3 weekly business, or don't you plan to?
It's a good business.
Dr. Sahu, I told Dr. Purvi to let you continue. I told him to let you continue.
Ullas,
yes, sir.
In PSRI hospital today morning, there was one admission of RT-PCR positive, and day for yesterday, there was one admission. And we all have these type of admissions ongoing in our hospitals. We all know now that rituximab and COVID don't go hand in hand. We all know that CLL and COVID don't go hand in hand. So to answer your long question short, I don't think I'm going to stop in near future unless until there are 0 cases for 7 to 10 days. Otherwise,
for 7 to 10 days. Singapore also doesn't expect the 0 cases for 7 days. Anyway, that's okay. That's absolutely okay. So.
Yeah, so I will give you the data of the sales of Illumina. Okay. They have a almost monopoly of the entire COVID testing all over the world.
Okay.
Before COVID started, their sales was 1.4 billion globally. Okay. In the last 18 months of COVID, their sales is 5.6 billion. Okay. And now they are seeing that the trend of their sales is drastically going down, just like the second wave is going down in India. So that should give you an idea of what is happening globally.
Fair enough, sir. Fair enough. I agree with everybody on this. Although my point is slightly, I would still not change the protocols at RGCI because my infectious disease guide doesn't let me change the protocols over there for any routine chemotherapy. But any supportive care, we do test them for COVID. Anybody who is not coming for chemotherapy, the only fact over there is that patient is going to be there only for just 1 day with us, so we don't test them. That's again a thing. Okay, so again, Dr. Rajiv, how long do you wait for chemotherapy before the person has been vaccinated? Before the patient has been tested positive for COVID? When do you want to give chemotherapy?
So it's like I basically see if he's had a very mild COVID infection, after a week or 10 days, we start therapy.
Now you also have access to my laptop. Everybody has access to my laptop. I thought so. So if it is a mild asymptomatic, how much do you wait? If it's moderate, admitted in
and if it's patient is admitted in the ward, at least then 2 weeks. We don't wait for the patient to have a negative report. We don't do the testing anymore again. We just wait for 2 weeks, and the patient becomes asymptomatic, counts are normal, we go ahead. Severe admitted into the ICU, many a times it takes probably more than 3 weeks for them to actually come out. They itself are not very keen to come back because they are already having fatigue due to COVID. They don't want to get fatigued due to the chemotherapy
Dr.
again.
Sanjay, when do you operate on these patients?
Sir, in emergency anytime?
No, emergency no, sir. We are cold oncological patients, sir.
I have got emergencies of COVID patients also. Sir. Therefore, I have to, they come with intestinal obstruction and anything. So yes, we do a colostomy or something like that, or bleeding. We have to like it.
Patients, sir. Cold
patients after 3 to 4 weeks.
After 3 to 4 weeks. Okay.
Not before that.
Dr. Chetan?
Yes. So basically, for this testing, we have not been testing at TMH. We have made mass compulsory. We will test only for symptomatic patients and patients who go to a common area like for radiation or those who go for surgery.
Okay.
And post infection, we would for the pediatric patients, we have seen that they tolerate pretty well. So we will continue with the chemotherapy.
Okay, and then do you test them for repeat COVID again negative? Because a typical problem which occurs in Delhi is people would have got tested positive for COVID 4 days back. Then they'll come to us and they will not disclose the report. And then they said, also, naya test kara lo. And RT-PCR se karana. That comes as negative. They said, okay, fine, go ahead. So do you test for that? I mean, how does it go?
Yes, we will test for a negative test before we take the surgery. Okay. Before any procedure. Yeah,
Amish,
we will test.
Do you agree?
We want them to be negative.
You just give me for mild asymptomatic, when do you restart? For moderate, when do you restart? And do you require this? Just a small this thing.
It all depends on for whom are you starting, na? We have discussed this. If you're starting for leukemia, lymphoma, or any curative
a solid tumor, breast cancer chemotherapy.
Stage
3.
Stage 3. I think 14 days after symptom resolution, or anywhere from 14 to 21 days after symptom resolution is something when I have started in the second wave.
Okay. Dr. Sahu agrees with it?
Yeah, I think it's fair. For mildly asymptomatic, so 1 week is okay, depending upon the disease. What protocol are you planning? I think that's.
Sir, Dr. Parekh, medico-legal aspect of that. There was a guy in our hospital who was IMED for 15 days. We shifted him to ICU, did biopsies and all. We didn't get a COVID test done. We wanted to get a colonoscopy done for him. We asked for a COVID test. A guy comes back and tells us, 15 दिन से तो याद नहीं आई, अब क्यों करा रहे हो COVID test? So is there a medico-legal responsibility for that? What is that angle, sir?
So medico-legal responsibility is to follow the SOP of the institution.
Institute.
Yeah. So if you have an institute written down policy, please make sure that you follow it to the T.
Okay. Fair enough. So I think it's very important to have an SOP. That is what we did. I mean, what exactly you said. We said we have an SOP. We will not do this. That's it for you. So that is what we did.
किया होता positive निकलता ना, वो तुमको ही बोलता.
नहीं वो अगली बार किया सर, अगली बार किया, वो अगले दिन किया.
के अंदर वो आया मतलब वहीं से मिला उसको.
True. Rajiv, rituximab and COVID. Just let me know. I treat very few lymphomas now. Just give me a brief rundown about rituximab and COVID. De novo patient. Yeah.
So I would not use rituximab because we don't know what exactly is going to happen. So now
today I have a DLBCL patient, stage 3, IPI 4/5, young 32-year-old male.
First cycle I'll give COP or CHOP. And then afterwards, then probably rituximab after that.
First cycle you will give a CVP, second cycle you will add R-CHOP. Sahu boss?
I will give chemotherapy R-CHOP for this patient if it's fit for that protocol. In the first, for patients who are COVID positive already, I will avoid rituximab. Otherwise, I would not hesitate to give rituximab.
You are not stopped giving rituximab. Is that what you're saying?
I start rituximab, but if it's someone who's positive, I do not give rituximab.
Dr. Chetan, what would you do?
So we are avoiding rituximab on all our pediatric patients as much as possible. Poor responders we will add.
Okay.
Positive, negative does not matter.
Amish?
I was waiting to get some answer in this panel because tomorrow I have one de novo patient and I don't know whether I should give rituximab or not. Honestly speaking, Ullas, Tarini and Parekh sir, honestly speaking, it's scared to start rituximab from the perspective of COVID because we all have seen, I have in my limited practice, I've got 3 burnt out in rituximab and I'm still managing them. So legally, how can we say no for rituximab? That is the biggest problem.
Okay, Dr. Sahu first and then Dr. Parekh.
Data for us to stop is to not stop rituximab. If there's a positive patient, to give rituximab after a recovery of COVID also is wrong. There the reactivation of virus happens. But if you are not giving it, there's a high grade NHL, it will be difficult for us for a legal perspective. That is
from somebody who has recovered, is there a data you cannot give rituximab?
That's
or you said you use it with caution.
You use with caution. That is the guidelines, what they say.
Exactly, and that word says enough.
No. It's not in a Burkitt's lymphoma where
okay, fine. Amish, it's 8:40. Wife is speaking. Dr. Parekh, sir.
Okay, so sir.
So Dr. T. Raja had shared data, if you remember, and he has had some really bad outcome of patient receiving rituximab. If that data is true, and we have no reason to doubt that, I would be very reluctant from the medical legal point of view of giving rituximab to our patients.
So even
after recovery, after 1 month,
de novo or after COVID, sir?
Dr. Amish and Dr. Sahu, 1 second. Sir, if we get that in return from them that we have been explained regarding the complications that rituximab may cause, and having read that, we are fully aware we want to take rituximab. Is that okay if we really want to give?
So that is some additional better precautions, but you never know what the courts will decide.
Okay.
So just one question.
The last, Chetan, please.
Yeah. So basically, I want to ask, what is the difference in CHOP versus R-CHOP? How much difference does it make?
15%.
Yeah,
15% to 20%.
15%. 43 to 58% was the first GELA trial.
Right. So for adults, definitely you will have to think about. But at least what we have seen is that those patients who have received rituximab immediately or peri-COVID period, they have continued to have positivity for a prolonged period of time. So that is well known, and we also have seen complications.
Can I ask Dr. Dipali, what did you do, Dr. Dipali, in UK?
I must say I'm just practicing with solid tumors, so I don't have huge experience about. Yeah, I don't practice hemato-oncology.
I did talk to my hemato-oncologist at Rajiv Gandhi, and they said we have been content rituximab, but then they can be in those brush off arrogances with hematologists that we will manage whatever it comes over there. But I think rituximab is one drug that we should be very scared about. Yes, Dr. Sahu.
The thing about rituximab, the guideline, what they tell you, most of it is you have to weigh the benefits and the risk. If there's a high-grade aggressive lymphomas, you would not take away rituximab like that. If it's a low-grade something, then I think you can.
Dr. Amish, what I think we can do is what I did for one of my patients is I did not give, like Rajiv said, I gave COP in the first one. I asked him to get the vaccine done on that particular day itself. In the second cycle, I had added the rituximab CHOP with it. That's what I did. I don't know if that's right or wrong, and I took it from in writing.
You need to vaccinate completely.
Sir, lymphoma to badh jayega na. That's the issue. So when would you?
Tarini, you are discussing with somebody who knows the figures of GELA trial in spite of not treating DLBCL. Kyun argue kar rahe hain?
Okay. Is there any other chemo regimen change that you have done? Dr. Chetan first.
So we have tried to avoid giving fludarabine or most of the T-cell depleting drugs. We have avoided rituximab altogether as much as possible. Those are the things we have done. In the first wave, we had made some modifications, but in the second wave, we have not continued.
Rajiv, for you?
Nothing. In sense that actually we've been fortunate enough to have a lot of supplies. I've not changed any chemotherapy regime. Like we mentioned here, CHOP and then rituximab later, but I've not had any problems.
I will tell you one more thing which we did was instead of BEP, I have made my patients of GCD VIP. That's what I did. And in seminoma second stage where we were supposed to give 3 BEP, we gave 4 EP. That's another one thing that I have done because we don't know bleomycin, pulmonary fibrosis, and this is one more thing that I have done. That was it. Okay.
And then for AMLs, we have started a lot of like Kidwai in Bangalore has started using azacitidine, decitabine, rather than giving 3+7. They started doing this is a full because blood products were hard to come by.
Okay. Dr. Amish, this is for you. Guidelines for admission, same as that of non-cancer patients, concerns about GCSF. So tomorrow, my problem here is, see my first patient of COVID in the first wave, I was giving dose dense AC to her in a T2, N2, M0, but she was ERPR positive. She came to me with ER counts of 300, did a COVID, which was positive. I didn't know about GCSF, I have given a GCSF. Now, I was in a dilemma. In a young lady, if I don't give dose dense, after 5 years, if she comes back, I'll feel bad that, why didn't I give dose dense? If with dose dense, I give GCSF and she gets COVID, I'll feel bad whether she'll even survive till 5 years. So, what have you changed your practice for dose dense or not?
Very simple. Do RT-PCR 1 day before dose dense AC. Give
sir,
PEG
but
GCSF,
day
give
5
PEG
पे आ गया तो
GCSF
day
on the
5 पे आ
third
गया
day.
तो
Give PEG GCSF on the third day, so you are safe. But that is what I have done. That in
but on day 7, if she has COVID on day 7, that's what I'm asking you. On a very serious note, you have done a RT-PCR. She comes back on day 7 with a COVID. Then what?
See, if she has only neutropenia, I would wait for PEG GCSF to continue working, and it will start working in 48 hours. If she has got febrile neutropenia, I would definitely give GCSF to her. There is no doubt.
Okay, Dr. Chetan and Dr. Rajiv, do you agree?
I agree. It's a very tricky question. I will be giving growth factor because she has to survive this first, and then afterwards, then the chances of lung fibrosis. So I'd be like, let's do the growth factor first.
Okay, Dr. Chetan?
We have continued giving growth factor.
Sahubas, plasma therapy, yes, no. Third wave, just in case.
No.
Remdesivir, yes, no.
Which one?
Remdesivir.
Remdesivir, yes. If it is in an early viral phase, I would not hesitate.
Tosi, yes, no.
If it is a proven cytokine storm in the right patient, yes.
Our experience with Tosi has been that.
Tilak is here. Tilak, where did you disappear?
I was here.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see you on my screen. Sorry.
Last, apni galti mat chupa do.
So doesn't this look like to be more of my ragging last session rather than the moderation by me?
So I feel that Tosi has been that you have to very carefully choose your patients, and if the patients do not do very well with pulse methylprednisolone and clinically have got features of storm, we don't even wait for the IL-6, and that's what we did in the second wave. We took them as clinical cytokine storm and gave them tocilizumab.
Okay.
Doctor was negative.
Dr. Chetan, bevacizumab, poor man's Tosi?
We have not used bevacizumab. We have used Tosi in a very select cases.
Okay, Sahu was?
See, I'm biased because I deal with the lower middle class. Tosi was not available. It was costly, but I felt Bev did work in some of my patients, but it is my personal, very small, 6-7 patients. I did not lose one of them.
Okay. Doesn't make
We use tofacitinib in place of tocilizumab, which is much cheaper.
But Tosi, I used in 3 and 2 out of 3 improved. And the right patient selection is the key. That's what I felt in COVID. Every therapy, what you have said.
The last question, this is my last slide. Timing of chemo and vaccine. When do we give? Let's go to Dr. Chetan. I have my second cycle of AC tomorrow. When will I want to give vaccine?
So I would probably give it in between the chemotherapy doses when their counts are just recovering.
That's 3 weeks. Dr. Amish, you seem to be shaking your head slightly.
There is no data. The guidelines say that before starting chemotherapy, vaccinate if possible. But if the patient is on chemotherapy, give them whenever it is available. Initially, 1 month back, I used to give vaccine in between chemo, as Chetan said. I have started giving on the day of chemotherapy also. So far, nothing wrong has been reported.
Tilak?
So 4 to 5 days before the next cycle.
Okay, just 5 days prior. Okay, final, just yes or no. Booster dose. Amish, will you or you advise your cancer patients? Yes. Rajiv?
Beshak. 6 months later, yes.
Okay, Dr. Sahu? Sahu is gone. Dr. Sanjay?
Yes.
Yes. Dr. Dipali, booster dose. Just in case you okay, good. Tilak?
Yes.
Chetan?
Yes, but if in the future we will be testing for antibodies, we will be testing
पहले
for
pediatric में अपनी पहली डोज तो करवा लो, उसके बाद हम बाद में देखेंगे क्या कराना है. If you get the dose for our children, let me know. I'll get my daughters vaccinated.
I think
okay. So that was my last slide, and this is my final slide on this. क्या ये दोबारा होगा? Will we see that troublesome trio again? Dr. Sahu, do you remember this?
Yes.
Bombay.
Yeah. This was just before the debate.
No. Just see the fourth one. Sandil ke paas.
I know. So, is this going to do that? This is my second last question. Is this going to happen again, sir?
Arik sir.
July 30th.
Yeah.
30th.
July 30th, August 1st. We have a 2 nights, 3 days program in Goa.
Also, my next question was that only. That where do you want that program to be? That's in Goa. Fantastic. So Dr. Sahu is a visionary. He found that out. But this is something which I really miss the face-to-face or something. It was just a fun-to-fun meet. And that's my last slide. I think we are going to live with COVID. and we're going to cut it to size. Like Sahu always cuts me to size. Not that I'm the COVID virus here, but this is what the way it is going to be. At the end, thank you for a wonderful discussion, and thank you, Dr. Parekh, Amish, Sahu boss, for the learning. If it was not for this webinar, I would not have learned. And the special point over here is the rituximab story. If I had not attended the webinar, I would have never known about the rituximab. My 2 patients could have, in which I changed treatment, would have gone here and there. So thank you for the learning. I mean, that's I always tell Dr. Khilnani. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Amish, please, over to you for the concluding remarks.
Thank you. I think Ullas is appearing for some director or HOD's role in MSKCC on Thursday.
Don't do that.
He's not going to be there. But Ullas, we all, on a serious note, you bring not only data, but data in a most humorous way. And we are really honored that as and when we called you, you always came. In fact, you participated in program planning also. So sincerely, thank you for everything. And I completely agree. Rituximab story is something which we would have missed, but not for this COVID vaccination, COVID webinar series. So our last webinar series for COVID and cancer is going to be on this Thursday, 1st of July. Dr. Mukul Acharya, who is a virologist in UK, with him, we have planned for some of the topics, especially side effects of vaccination in young population and preference of vaccine in young population, which includes pediatric also. I would request everyone who have supported us for so far, please be there during this last webinar series of this particular topic. And I thank everyone. Stay safe. Waiting for somebody to invite me for Goa. I have not been invited, sir. This is not fair.
Everybody is invited, and everybody is welcome to participate as required.
Thank you.
This is for us, Amish. This was not for you. This everybody that's actually over there.
I know. फिर भी मैं आ जाऊंगा, चिंता मत कर. Okay, all of you stay safe, and we meet on Thursday. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.